Welcome to another video. So, in celebration of National Drive Electric Week, Hyundai has set me up with this 2022 IONIQ 5 Limited all-wheel drive. This is a fully loaded model, spec'd out to around $55,000 MSRP. And in this video, I'm going to talk to you guys about what I like and dislike about driving this car. I've had the car for 4 whole days now. It's been my everyday commuter, my grocery getter, and in a couple of days here, I will be comparing its driving dynamics against the perennial favorite crossover EV, the Tesla Model Y dual motor. But before we get ahead of ourselves, let me talk about my experience with this car as a daily driver thus far. Since this is the all-wheel drive model, it's got one motor on the front axle, one on the rear, with a combined output of 320 horsepower. The car is rated for right around 250 to 260 miles of range. So what do I like and dislike about this car so far? Well, let me start off by saying that one of my favorite things about the IONIQ 5 is its exterior styling. I may not have grown up in the 80s, but I absolutely love the retro 80s vibe that this IONIQ 5 gives off. From its somewhat boxy exterior silhouette to its Tron-esque LED taillights, this car just screams 1980s, but not in an outdated way. This car manages to look old school and new school at the same time. It's got retro elements as well as futuristic elements to its design. The only thing that could be improved, in my opinion, and this is totally down to personal preference, is these wheels. Now, these particular wheels come with the fully spec'd limited trim, but on the base model, you do get a different wheel design. When I first saw this car in photographs and before I saw it in person, I thought this was essentially a hatchback or a slightly lifted hatchback. But in person, this car might be bigger than you think. I would call this a mid-size crossover in terms of size. The next thing I happen to like about this car happens to be the interior design. The interior, for the most part, matches the exterior look and feel. Plenty of futuristic elements. We've got these 2 large landscape touchscreen displays, this super cool 2-spoke steering wheel, a combination of physical buttons and knobs as well as touch controls in the center console here. Since this is an EV and doesn't have a transmission tunnel, there's plenty of storage for random knickknacks. In fact, my girlfriend, one of the first things she said when she got in this car is, "I love it. There's finally a place for me to put my purse right under this armrest here." Something she does not get in her Honda Accord. The overall fit and finish, the materials quality, is what you would expect of a mid $50,000 car. Nothing is overly scratchy or harsh to the touch, and all in all, a very well integrated design. On top of that, the tech within this car is excellent. Hyundai as a manufacturer has long been known as a provider of bang for the buck in terms of features, standard equipment, and technology. And this IONIQ 5 is no exception. I'm pleased to say that this built-in navigation system works surprisingly well, actually shockingly well. It is one of the best built-in nav systems I've used in any car. It's quick, it's responsive. I've had no issues with the voice control thus far, and the display pretty much shows me everything I want to see. Of course, you can hook up your phone for Apple CarPlay or Android Auto, but honestly, I haven't had a reason to yet. I've just been using this wireless phone charger down here, plop my phone on there, use the Bluetooth for my music, but then I just rely on the built-in navigation to get me around. Now, speaking of the built-in nav, when you are using that system and not your phone, you get the option to switch on an augmented reality heads-up display, which shows you all kinds of useful info about your navigation. And it also does a great job of making you very aware of your surroundings. The safety features are the best I've experienced in any modern car. And a big part of that is the partial self-driving functionality. Using these fairly intuitive buttons on the steering wheel, you can toggle on and off various features within the self-driving capabilities of the car. On the freeway, and I've tested this extensively over the past few days, the automatic cruise control combined with the lane keep assistance and the auto braking feature basically means I almost don't have to touch the wheel or the pedals at all when I'm just sitting in stop and go traffic. The car does have built-in sensors to warn you on this display here if you haven't been touching the steering wheel for too long. Again, a nice built-in safety feature to make sure you're paying attention to the road. But all in all, this car makes it so easy to relax on your day-to-day commute. The sound system is by Bose, and it's decent. It's not the best sound system I've heard in any car, or even cars in this price range for that matter, but it's good. It's good enough. You've got plenty of standard USB-A ports here for your phones and your mobile devices. We have heated and ventilated seats, 2 memory buttons for the driver's seating position, and a host of other tech features that are not only useful, but also very intuitive and easy to use. I was a bit intimidated when I first jumped in this car because I knew ahead of time that it would be chock full of tech, but I very quickly became acclimated to the layout of all the controls, the UI, and overall I'm very impressed with this car from a tech perspective. So the 3 things I like about this car that I've covered thus far: the exterior design, the interior design, and the technology. The 4th thing I love about this car, and this is critical if this is going to be your daily driver, is the ride comfort. This car is incredibly comfortable. On the road, this thing is pretty much dead silent, as you'd expect from an EV. And I'm super pleased to report that after around the 6,200 miles that this car has done, I have noticed no squeaks or rattles in the interior. And I have had no audible distractions from my peace and quiet when commuting in this thing. Suspension-wise, this car is very softly sprung. I don't know the exact spring rates, but the ride quality is very plush. That being said, it's not perfect, and I'll explain why in just a moment. But overall, just know that this is a very, very comfortable and serene car to drive on a daily basis. Being a full-sized crossover, this thing's also very spacious. I have plenty of legroom in the driver's seat. There's plenty of space in the back seat as well. Good headroom, good legroom. This car can easily accommodate 5 adults, especially since there is no transmission tunnel, so you can actually leverage that middle seat in the back. Now, the 5th and final thing I really like about this car is the price. You can get a base rear-wheel drive model for less than $40,000 MSRP here in the US. As I said, this fully spec'd all-wheel drive limited model is right around $55,000. That is significantly cheaper than the competing Tesla Model Y dual motor. And these prices are before you consider the $7,500 federal EV rebate. You get a very thoughtfully designed and intuitive and comfortable interior with pretty much all the tech you could reasonably ask for at this price range, and you get over 250 miles of real-life range. I've been driving this thing pretty conservatively the past couple of days, and it stayed true to its rated range. I'm getting very close to 250 miles. Not quite as much range as you get with the Model Y dual motor, at least on paper, but it's not far off. And if you really want that extra range, you could go for the rear-wheel drive model of this car, which gets over 300 miles. Now, that brings me to the things I don't like about this IONIQ 5. As I alluded to earlier, one of the things I don't love about this car is actually the driving dynamics. Now, what do I mean by that, considering I just said the car is super comfortable? There is one caveat to the way that this car's suspension is set up. It is so softly sprung that it does feel a bit lethargic in the corners. If you're just driving the car around normally, I mean, it's a moot point. It doesn't really matter. However, if you do some spirited driving, I suspect the Tesla Model Y and even the sister of this car, the Kia EV6, will be better to drive dynamically. They'll corner flatter. They'll give you a little bit better body control overall. And one of the things I noticed with this car's suspension setup, at highway speeds, let's call that 65 miles per hour or above, the rear suspension has a little bit of excessive motion. More specifically, when it hits a bump, the rear compresses, rebounds, and then it compresses again and rebounds again. So it has an extra compression and rebound stroke before that rear axle settles. It's really not a big deal, and to the average person, you probably won't even notice it. But hey, you guys know me. I'm all about critiquing the driving dynamics of any car, even if it is a practical, efficient crossover EV. The Tesla Model Y, for example, does not do that. That being said, the Tesla Model Y is a lot less comfortable, especially for rear seat passengers. And one other thing to note is that this car with a dual motor configuration is rated at 320 horsepower and oodles of torque. And it gives you that instantaneous torque response the moment you get on that throttle pedal. This car has more than enough straight line performance for your needs. You can easily pass pretty much any car on the freeway, and from a dead stop, if you mash it, you will send your passengers' heads back into their headrests. However, compared to the Model Y and compared to cars like the Polestar 2 Performance, this car lacks that top end pull. So if you're on the freeway going 65, 70 miles an hour and you mash it, it's responsive, but ultimately the speed doesn't build that quickly, at least not nearly as quickly as it does in those other cars I mentioned. But for me, this car has more than enough straight line performance for its intended purpose. And going back to the exterior design of this car for a moment, when I saw this car in photos, it gave me the impression that it's kind of a compact, sprightly and nimble little EV, but I realized very quickly after driving it, this is a full-size crossover. It is not a lightweight car. It weighs, I believe, over 4,600 pounds, and you feel that weight. Don't be misled into thinking this is a EV hot hatch. Now, there are a few other things I don't like about this car, and most of them are interior quirks. These may be specific to me, but I think they're worth pointing out. For example, these cup holders here between the front seats, they don't really grip narrower cups all that well. And honestly, I only noticed it because my girlfriend and I went to go get boba. Boba places seem to be having this trend nowadays of very tall and slender cups. So take that as you will. Another interior quirk is that these two screens here, while they are very functional and very easy to use, I'm not a fan of these huge bezels. It's very 2015 Samsung Galaxy-esque, if you know what I mean. It's just not a very sexy design, especially with the displays off. It essentially looks like two giant phablets, if you guys remember that term, fused together. And one other thing about these screens that I noticed, the way I have my driving position set up in this car, the seat is as low as it'll go, which is still just a tad too high for my liking. And then I have the steering wheel lowered a decent amount and pulled all the way towards me. Now, when I have that set up to my liking, the top left and right corners of this main display are slightly cut off by the steering wheel. It doesn't really cut off any useful information, but it just got me thinking, how cool would it be if that display actually moved along with the steering wheel? I know there's a few other cars out there with that design. I am literally nitpicking at this point. There are so few things about this car that I actually dislike. And to nitpick even more, one of the other things I'm not a fan of is this trend of moving to touch-sensitive climate control buttons. This is just an industry trend nowadays. For some reason, touch-sensitive controls are just considered more futuristic and sexier. But to me, it just makes it harder for me to change my climate controls because it requires me to take my eyes off the road and onto the controls, and there's no haptic feedback. But all in all, I have been thoroughly impressed by this Hyundai IONIQ 5. As a daily driver, as an EV, this IONIQ 5, specifically in limited all-wheel drive trim, checks all the boxes for me. It truly is one of the best new cars I have driven. I have been writing off EVs for a very long time because I thought they simply weren't for me, but this IONIQ 5 has me considering getting one for myself in the next couple of years. I think the only thing holding me back at this point is the charging infrastructure, and that is not a Hyundai issue. So a big thank you to Hyundai for setting me up with this IONIQ 5 for a week. Give this video a thumbs up if you enjoyed it. Subscribe if you have not already, and I'll see you in the next one.